had not done one since like April the previous year.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like I just needed to change the direction for it.
Okay.
I mean, we were very successful and doing really well, but I needed to go a different direction. I didn't like where we were going.
Gotcha. Yeah, it could be. I mean, speaking from experience from doing this thing, this show has definitely evolved over time, and it takes about 50 episodes to figure out what you're doing, you know, and, you know, I'm kind of proud where we ended up at this point. And, but, you know, you got your learner episodes and you're like, okay, we can't have that kind of guest on anymore. And like all those, you know, all those lessons that you pick up along the way, and eventually you form your own identity and, you know, and then figure it out, really, quite frankly.
We were able to get enough influence with the state agencies, legislators, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So we'll launch a All Florida podcast. In fact, we've got 14 of them recorded already.
Oh, cool.
But they're going to be a little bit of Eat Your Vegetables podcasts.
Right.
Like we're not going to have 15,000 listeners on that. Mm-hmm. We're going to have 500.
Right.
But they're going to be 500 dedicated because specific to that issue, we're going to talk to. I'll tell you straight up, I could not find anyone in the fishing world or the conservation world that had ever talked to anyone at U.S. Sugar.
Really?
So I called them. Said, hey.
And?
Yeah, absolutely. So I interviewed a PhD scientist at U.S. Sugar.
Right. That's great.
Like why are we all talk about working together, right?
Yeah.
Does it only cut one way?
Yeah.
I
think that's kind of the solution, right? Like is
I think it's 100%
of the solution. What would you say the other all the tide rises all the boats?
Rising tide floats all boats.
Yeah, floats all boats. So
anyway, we'll release that podcast whenever. We've got a few technical difficulties on our website. That's what I was meeting on this morning. But that podcast will come out, and we called it Chasing Fog because that's, if you ever read A Land Remembered. Mm-hmm. So the penultimate part of the book, he talks about you're trying to capture the fog and you'll never be able to do that. Yeah. So we called it Chasing Fog, and we had a Florida artist design a logo for us, and it's going to be a pretty cool deal, but it will not be in this space.
Right.
It'll be more in the science leadership, right? Like that space. I'm excited about it. It's going to be really cool.
You know, it's funny you talk about spaces and the spaces that you hit and the topics that you cover, and you know, it took us a little while to find our identity from that regard. But, you know, we try to cover like a lot of bases, a lot of different topics and a lot of different people, and not be too one-dimensional in regards. Sometimes that works against us, you know what I mean? But that you don't really just target one audience at all times. But I never wanted to be that anyway. So for better or worse, that's what we are.
We'll actually loop back to you because this is pretty interesting to me. We're doing, I'm calling them seasons in my head, that are 8 to 12 episodes per season. Okay. With a theme over it. So the first one is kind of problems. So we have U.S. Sugar. We interview 5 people from the spray program at the University of Florida. Yeah. We interview someone on prescribed fire, which is a pretty controversial issue. We interview someone that's done springs research. I can't remember the others. Just a couple more. But they're all kind of like controversial topics. Sure. Now, the interviews aren't controversial. I'm talking to a scientist. Like they're not super fun and joyful. Yeah. But we're just kind of talking through that. We're going to do one on the people of the land. So like the ranchers, the probably do Seminole and Miccosukee. Mm-hmm. We'll do ag. We'll do someone in the farming space. We're going to do one on artists. Cool. So around the state, like there's a number of artists and they're different, how they story tell through their mediums. Yeah. But the idea is to kind of build these little season pockets. And we can release 8 or 10 episodes at a time. And then I'm just going to do it a little bit differently because doing one every week was like riding a tiger. There's no good way to get off of it.
Well, yep. Well, let me tell you,
you're gonna get bit when you get off.
Oh boy, that's where we're 176 episodes right now. This is 176, and we've been doing it every week.
We were 254 sequentially, but we actually did another 100 interview episodes on top of that. Wow. So yeah, it was just like producing that much content. There was a year where I did 2 episodes a week. Yeah. And it was great, and we had a shit ton of listeners, and it was fun, and we made a little bit of money off of it, but we generated a lot of money in other areas off of it. Mm-hmm. It's just, and the community was incredible, but we can pivot that into some other stuff.
Sure. Sure. Let me officially just kick this show off here, right? So this is the Connected by Water podcast, fueled by our very good friends at Papa's Pilar Rum, who remind you never to be a spectator. We are a Waypoint hosted podcast. You can find us there, or also watch, listen, and do not forget to subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Hit that like button, please. We would love to hear from you in the comments or by email at sales@connectedbywater.com. But before we begin, we would like to announce our Starbright Solutions Do-Gooder of the Week. And this week it is none other than Willie Gault, not to be confused with former Chicago Bears wide receiver Willie Gault. This is Willie Gault. And whenever Willie is not running a successful concrete business, he loves to fish. And he takes his fishing team with him often. They constantly send Corey Redwine videos of themselves cleaning up their local waterways. And for that, Willie is our Starbright Solutions Do-Gooder of the Week. So congratulations, Willie. Your Starbright care package is on its way. So we'd like to thank Papa's Pilar Rum and Starbright for their great support of our show. And today's guest, to officially introduce you, my friend, my new friend, right? Travis Thompson. Travis, you do a lot of different things. You got your hands in a lot of different pots. So rather than me kind of go through that and explain to the audience who and what you are and what you do, why don't you go ahead and take a crack at it for me, if that's all right?
Yeah, man. So I appreciate you guys having me over. This is awesome.
I appreciate you being here. Just cool so people know you came in from out of town, and we always love when that happens.
I love it, man. This is awesome. And you had I had watched your show because or listened to your show. Mm-hmm. I didn't watch. I'm sorry. I listened.
That's okay. Most people actually listen.
My friend Mike Elfenbein and Diamond Bergeron and Tom Oates, they were on your show. And
one of my favorite episodes.
Yeah, incredible stuff. They're incredible advocates. So I do a couple of things. So some people know me from Cast and Blast Florida podcast, which we did for years. Mm-hmm. We still will drop an episode every once in a while for fun, but we've shelved that for the time being.
Yeah.
But I have a couple of brands out there. One is Duck Ranching, which is the largest waterfowl hunting operation in the state of Florida. Mm-hmm. And then we have a nonprofit, and that's really kind of where my heart and soul is in advocacy for this place,
right?
Connecting people to a place like the state of Florida. And so All Florida it's a conservation organization. We work on woods, water, wildlife, way of life are the kind of the four pillars we talk about. Mm-hmm. And that covers, everything from, when we say woods, we mean land. When we say water, we mean water. Wildlife, obviously, the animals that we love to, both the ones we love to chase and catch, but also the ones we love to just see and enjoy, the kites and the stuff like that. And then way of life is obviously, I think, some of the stuff that makes Florida so special. It's everything from our ag and our ranching and our inland stuff to fishing, hunting, hiking, the things that make this place like this place.
Yeah.
That's why we care about this place. So
1,000,000%. And we were talking before the show started about our passion for Florida, your passion for Florida, and how I was like, I agree with that's what this show is all about. And this is what I've dedicated my life to as well. And it's being a Florida native is just one of the proudest things that I say. It's like a badge of honor when I say that to people, because I am very proud to be from the state.
I'll hit you with a fascinating fact. Okay. Mm-hmm.
By the way, the state of Florida and I share the birthday, March 3rd.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yes,
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, little known fact.
We're just freestyling, right?
Proud. Yeah.
Okay. So, state of Florida, this is a thing that I think about more than I probably ever should. State of Florida leads the country in caskets exported.
Caskets exported?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because people come here to live out their retirement or whatever.
Right.
And then they die, and they want to go someplace else, wherever home was, to be buried.
I never thought about that like that.
Not true Floridians.
And it's just really, it's troubling to me because I don't mind those people coming here. I want them to fall in love with this place to where this is their home, and they care about it like they do wherever it was they want to go be buried.
Right.
I want them to care about this place the way I care about this place, which is, this is my dirt, this is my land, this is my water. Don't care about it deeply. Don't just come here and use it.
Yep.
Don't just come here and exploit it. Come here and be a part of it.
Yeah, my plan is to be buried right next to my grandparents, right where my parents or my dad is now, and and then that's it, man. That's 100%. I feel that for sure. Totally. You're native, right?
Sort of. I'm first generation.
First generation. Yeah, well, you're from Tampa, right? Originally,
yeah. Tarpon Springs. He said
Tarpon Springs, and then
very
then
different.
he graduated from Florida State. Yeah.
I'm sorry about that. We won't use big words for you, man.
Here we go.
Here we go.
So listen, I said when I was introducing you my new friend, because we recently kind of linked up together. One of the things that really brought me to you is all the work that you recently did up in Tallahassee, and I'd really love to kick this off by really getting through that stuff.
Sure, absolutely.
So we recently had aligned with all of our discharges that are happening right now, which is a hot button topic. We had meetings up in Tallahassee, right? That you attended. You were there with certain organizations that we are linked up with together. Take me through how that week was and what you accomplished.
Well, so some of those organizations, like you mentioned, like CCA Florida, like I have this tenet kind of around all Florida that decisions get made by those who show up. Mm-hmm. I stole that from The West Wing. If anybody's old enough to watch that show, stole it from that. But it's true. Decisions get made by the people in the rooms.
Right. And
I started really kind of coming around that about 6 or 7 years ago. We were having such bad water quality issues where I was guiding. Back then, I was guiding fishing more than I was hunting in Southwest Florida. And I was losing so many trips. I was like, dude, how am I taking from this resource? I'm making money off this resource, and I'm not showing up in the room to speak up for the resource.
Right.
And I'm only showing up when it's bad. And if you only show up when it's bad, it's too late. Like, you got to get involved and stay involved. And that doesn't mean you got to do what I do, or you got to do what like Tripp does at CCA or some of those other. You can't go away from this and your friends and family and be gone for weeks at a time working on it. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean you can show up sometimes.
Sure.
Right? You can pull your weight. So Tallahassee, Florida has session where our state legislators get together in Tallahassee, and it's, depending on how you look at it, it's a good thing or bad thing, but they get together and you start seeing bills rolled out, you start seeing legislation rolled out, and every session we have bills that we like, we have bills that we don't like, and the only place to affect that change is to go be in the room. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, the only place to really affect that change is to be in the room and start developing relationships with some of those people now, before you see the bills that come out next session or 2 years down the road or 3 years down the road. I've been talking to someone about a bill that's slated for 3 years out.
Wow.
And I don't know if we support it or not, but I want to have some influence over what that thing's going to look like. Mm-hmm. And the only way to do that is to put the effort in. And there's a lot of unsexy stuff that goes on.
Right.
Like, you're sitting in a room and you're talking about policy for 3 hours. And maybe you go to dinner and you talk about policy for 2 more hours. And anyway, so the last couple of weeks I've been up there. I was up there a few weeks back for Florida Wildlife Corridor Days.
Okay. Can you explain that to the audience, what that actually is?
So I'm really proud of this because I've been, I'll say all Florida, but Travis too, has been one of the first sportsmen that was involved in the Wildlife Corridor.
Okay.
I've been kind of not part of their team, but part of their team, the greater team, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Not the formal team, but and so I've been able to go to Tallahassee a few times with them on the Florida Wildlife Corridor. But the idea there is it's a green infrastructure in the state of Florida. Interconnected green pathways so that you have the ability for animals, wildlife to move. And if you get into like animal science, you get genetic diversity that way. You're able to expand populations. Have you guys seen Path of the Panther, like the Ward documentary?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we brought that up too on Mike and Diamond and Tom's episode too.
Okay.
Like we touched on it, but
so the idea there is like if you want panthers to expand, a male panther has like a 20-mile range, and if they overlap, they'll fight to the death. Like they get after it. So
really,
like panthers kill panthers, as do cars.
Right.
So you've got to have corridors for them to be able to move, and then you also have to have game for them to be able to eat, and you have to have to expand the range out, they've got to be able to go.
Right. So they'll just straight up brawl?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
I never knew that about panthers.
Yeah.
Like, I figured, you're going to get some cat fights every now and then, but, no. It's pretty much like
they will go
it's
at
on,
it.
Huh?
I have heard stories of like the tomato fields down south where they will find dead panthers that were not shot. They were killed by other panthers.
Wow.
In
defeated.
Fights. Yep.
Wow.
It's not common, obviously, because there's not that many Panthers. If it happened like 5 times a week, it'd be a problem. But it happens pretty often whenever you get that range overlap. So I was up there a few weeks back, corridor stuff. Anytime you go to Tallahassee, you try to do what I don't know the right term in Tallahassee, but I always call it walking the hill, because that's what you call it in DC.
Yep.
You try to go around and meet with legislators that you have a relationship with, or that you're trying to develop a relationship with. And I like to think that personally, I'm less of a transactional person. Like, I want to get to know these people and find out, is this a person I want to know? I think legislators, sometimes they look at you and you're like, this person wants something from me.
Right.
And I don't blame them one bit, because I've watched their offices and how that transpired. But as you spend time up there, you begin to learn that, hey, some of these folks are really good folks and they really want to do good work here. Sometimes they're sponsoring a bill that they may not even agree with, because they're trading out something that they think is really important for it.
Right.
So it's not always easy to judge necessarily what you see right in front of you. But it also does mean that you can build those relationships up and then disagree with them correctly, appropriately, and say, look, I'm going to fight you on this. I'm going to fight you respectfully on this. But just so you understand, this is where I'm coming from, but I also understand where you're coming from, and make sure that they're heard and you're heard.
Yeah, see, the politics is a very, very strange operation from that regard.
Weird world.
It is clearly a game that people have to play, and for better or worse, right? Just like you explained. And for that reason, that's why I never wanted to ever go into politics at all, because I'm just not wired that way.
I get asked a lot, are you going to run for office? I'm like, absolutely not. Because if I ran for office, I couldn't work on the stuff I wanted to work on.
Yeah.
Like, I'm way more effective not being able to run for office. So then more recently, obviously, Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission, they have they meet 5 times a year. And I'm proud of this. I've missed one commission meeting in the last 6 years. And that's because I was at another meeting out of state. But we try to attend those meetings, because that's when you can really advocate for fisheries regulations, fisheries management, but also you'd be amazed at the breadth of what FWC manages. A lot of private land stuff, a lot of obviously hunting stuff, game stuff, but also endangered species stuff. Also, so it's really this big, broad spectrum of conservation stuff. So I mentioned a minute ago, woods, water, wildlife, way of life.
Yep.
All of that gets discussed there. So about every year they have a meeting in Tallahassee. They haven't since COVID, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it had paused after COVID, and they hadn't gone back to Tallahassee since then. So this year that happened to coincide with session.
Okay.
So we went, myself, Mike Elfenbein, a couple other folks started putting together. We wanted to get together with FWC, with their staff and their commissioners, and have a dinner where you could take off your armor for a second and get to know each other.
Yeah.
Let's figure out a way we can.
Like a social.
Yeah. We deal with each other. We're colleagues. Let's get to know each other a little bit deeper, because it's really easy for me to be pissed at you on the internet. It's way harder once I know Dennis and I sit down in his room he's a good dude.
That's why I told you before, I don't like talking about people if they're not in the room.
Exactly.
I had a very, very hard time doing it.
So all of that happened. Well, in conjunction with that, we've also been working on a piece of legislation I'd like to talk about that too. It's called the right to fish and hunt in Florida.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into that.
So that was passed by the legislature last year, and it allowed it to go to the ballot in November this year. Well, we thought it would be good for all of these groups that kind of exist in the fishing and hunting and conservation space to give some awards to legislators for thanking them for their efforts in championing our cause. And some of these are legislators that probably ran bad water bills or bad whatever bills, but on this case, they had our back more than anybody else in the state had our back. So we recognized 22 legislators. We gave them a nice crystal trophy, and let Representative Mello, who was the sponsor and brought the bill forward, we let her say a few words at the event. The chairman of FWC came. He was able to speak and say a few words at the event. And we just had this really I was able to speak for a few minutes, and I don't know, do you guys remember what you talk about on the podcast after it's over, or do you black out a little bit?
Black out a little bit, yeah. So, we always do, yeah. But then we go back and listen to it again, and like, oh, yeah. And then
oh, man, I was so good.
Yeah,
so
you hear everything.
There's no recording that I know of what I said that night, but I got to speak at that event and talk a little bit about why that night mattered so much. And so we ended up with 20 co-sponsors sharing the financial burden of the event.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to speak at it, and I hope what I said was...
Are you at liberty to mention the co-sponsors?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it was the usual suspects. It was from the fishery side. I know for sure it was Bonefish Tarpon.
Yeah.
It was CCA Florida. It was American Sportfish Association.
Okay.
It was Florida Guides Association, and it was all Florida, our organization. Cool. Those groups are all members of ASA. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And then on the land conservation hunting side, or relevant to like your audience, you also had Bergeron Family Foundation. Mm-hmm. Diamond was on your show recently. Yep. Isaac Walton League, Mike Elfenbein was on your show recently. The other big ones that kind of come to mind, and I'm sure I'm going to leave somebody out, but it's like Ducks Unlimited, Delta Waterfowl, Safari Club International, like who's who. There's a group called American Daughters of Conservation. Nice. It's a women's group that does hunting and fishing excursions together. They co-sponsored it. Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Like, we tried to get as many people into this tent as possible. Mm-hmm. Like, if you wanted to sponsor it, up to the day we had to send stuff to the print shop, we would let you sponsor it.
Yeah.
Like, we even went to some sponsors like, look, if you can't afford it, tell us what you can afford and we'll figure it out. But we were able to keep the costs low because we split it up 20 ways.
Right.
So we throw this big dinner, this big event. We had a bunch of legislators come. We had FWC leadership come. We had the leadership of multiple state agencies there. And what I talked about when I got to turn at the microphone, I hope, so if someone was there and corrects me on this, I'm sorry because I blacked out. But what I hope I talked about was the idea of collaboration, the idea of teamwork, and the idea that we're all in the same boat on the same team.
Right.
And
we're all connected by water.
We're all connected. Yeah, it's exactly right. So it's funny. I use this analogy all the time where I talk about the name of all Florida. And sometimes when I'm public speaking, I'll go get like a jar, like a mason jar, mm-hmm. and I'll take it to the Kissimmee River and I'll fill it up with that jar. And I'll talk about the details of the Kissimmee River. Like, I'll say, here's the Kissimmee River in this jar, and it's this many miles long, and there's this many fish species in it, and this many ducks use it, and this many alligators in it, and this and that and the other. How many recreational days are used on it, and the amount of land that touches it, and everything else. And I'll say, this jar isn't all of the Kissimmee River, but everything in this jar is the Kissimmee River. It's all Kissimmee River. That's how I think about us.
Yeah.
Like, we all have these things that are Florida that are inside of us. Like, for me, I talk about duck hunting a lot because that's a thing that's a passion of mine. But I love snook fishing. I love inshore snook fishing, like top water. That drives me. It gets me out of bed in the morning.
That's my favorite thing to do.
Yeah.
Right here.
There's guys out there in my world that cattle ranching is their thing. Like, they love cattle ranching and turkey hunting, or they love bird watching, and so it's like there's parts of Florida in all of us. Mm-hmm. We can be all Florida without being everything of Florida, if that makes sense to 100%. Kind of turn a phrase. And so I'm really passionate about figuring out what drives people and figuring out ways to help them make that better in this place that I like. Next to my wife and kids, this is it for me, man. My love of is this state, this land, this place, these people. Like, this is it.
Yeah, and it's work that's worth dedicating your life to. Because it benefits everybody. It really does, and it's something that. I can speak for the fishing industry. It's something that the majority of people that do what we do are very passionate about, right? And for good reason, because it's something that I will say that it crosses political lines, because I think at the end of the day we all want the same thing, right?
Yep.
And I think at the end of the day, that we're willing to say, we talked about politics, we're willing to say that we're going to support someone who's got their head screwed on straight, that is going to make the right decisions. Now, that being said, who knows who that person really is at the end of the day, right? But when it comes to organizations, there are a lot of organizations out there that are doing the right thing for the right reasons, that are maybe doing the right thing, maybe not going about it the right way. And, but I think at the end of the day, we all want the same thing.
Oh, yeah. We all care about it.
Yeah.
We all care about all of it. So I think it's funny, and I don't know the right way to put this. I recognize that politics is a vehicle we have to live with.
Sure.
But it's not our overlord.
Correct.
It's what I believe. Now, it feels like it's our overlord sometimes, and like I think some of that's the social media, the 24/7 news cycles, the world we live in.
And that's always
like,
the ongoing argument, like bigger government, smaller government.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, where are we at? You know?
You see it constantly, but I really try to keep the stuff that I care about from being politicized.
Right.
And what I mean by that is like, it would be very easy for one party to take up, oh, we're the pro ranching party, or we're the pro hunting party, or we're the pro fishing party, make that part of their platform and politicize it. Mm-hmm. So now if you're a fisherman and you disagree on some other platform issues that are not specific to fishing, you've got to make a choice. Do I go this way or that way? I like it when our stuff, conservation, environmentalism, consumptive use, hunting, fishing, angling, I like it when that is apolitical. And so what that means is we have to go play in that space.
By the way. I agree with you 1,000,000% on this.
So we have to go play in that space a lot.
Yeah.
But what we want to do is make sure that when we're playing in that space, we're talking to everyone and trying to get everyone on our team and not letting it get hijacked into one side or the other.
Yeah, which it often does.
Always.
I mean, more often than not. I mean, it's always a tough line to cross. I mean, when we spoke the other day, you said that, we were talking about a lot of the water stuff and a lot of the Everglades stuff, and then you go, well, Mike Elfenbein's really the authority on the Everglades and stuff. And I asked you, well, what's your specialty? Explain to me that again. And I know specialty might not be the right term.
Sure, yeah, because
what's your focus, I guess, overall?
So it's great you brought that up because Mike, when I have an Everglades question, I call Mike or Nyla. Those are two of the first people I call. Mm-hmm. Betty Osceola is a great resource on that. We're going to talk about her a little bit. My specialty, I think, is really, if I had to boil it down, I would say it's the conservation model, the North American conservation model and how we fit into that. And not to bore you to death or anything, but you can go buy a textbook on the North American conservation model. You can take a wildlife ecology class and they're going to teach it to you. And it's got historical conservation concepts from like Aldo Leopold and George Grinnell and Teddy Roosevelt and Ding Darling, all these guys in there. And it's going to cover all this stuff. And it was codified around 2000 by a guy named Shane Mahoney and Dr. Valerius Geist. And it's this idea of wildlife management and science to do wildlife policy. And because first and foremost, I'm an angler and a hunter. Mm-hmm. Like I'm a sportsman before almost anything else. Even though I'm a conservationist, that's how I entered that conversation. Well, that's how I connected, right?
So I think that's really overall what we try to achieve here on the show. We've always said that it's the hunters and the fishermen that are the ultimate conservationists because they're the ones that actually use and respect the resource the most. The people that aren't, the people that are ancillary to that, don't necessarily have the drive or the focus that your hunters and fishermen do.
So I
More
agree.
Often than not, you're not going to find.
I think that was the case. I think we've seen a shift in that. And so when you ask my specialty, and I say the North American model of conservation, that's what brought me into this world. But I'm going to say specifically, if it's in Florida and it touches the word conservation, and I'll define conservation as proper use. Like when you conserve energy, you're saving that energy to use later, right? You're not keeping it from ever being used. Preservation is a different thing.
Right.
Preservation is for jams.
Restoration.
Preservation is for jams and jellies.
Right.
It can be used sometimes as a conservation tool, but it should not be. Sometimes it's a hammer in search of a nail. Restoration can be a conservation tool, but conservation as a whole is my specialty. So it doesn't matter if it's fisheries, if it's land, if it's water. I may not be the expert to get you a conservation easement, but I'll go find someone that is the expert to get you that conservation easement and figure out how to save that land. I may not be the expert in redfish science, but I'm going to go find the expert and figure out what that is. And I'm looking at this thing like a chessboard. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at this thing like a giant chessboard. And we have all these pieces on it, and they could be organizations, but those pieces could also just be parts of the state. They could be redfish and trout and tarpon and turkeys and ranching and agriculture. And how are we moving all this stuff around to win for our state?
Yeah.
How are we manipulating this stuff to win, particularly when we're governed by a whole bunch of other things that go on here, like economic drivers? And
it's the thing, you're bringing people and their governance into the picture that changes
exactly
everything.
Right.
It's like this big mathematical equation. It's not just about Lake O and the discharges. There are a million things that go into why that's happening.
Exactly right. So
I want to definitely touch on that today.
Yeah, we can get into that because it's so complex when you start to look at I'm a single issue guy.
Mm-hmm.
My kids are old enough now. I'm not worried about public education. I'm not worried about health insurance the same way. Maybe I'll worry about that as I get older or something. But right now I'm a conservation guy.
Yeah.
So I'm able to look at most things through the lens of conservation and how that affects or disaffects. But there's also this concept of we term it landscape conservation,
mm-hmm.
which is communities are not exempt from the conservation conversation or consideration in that conversation. Meaning we're in downtown, where are we at? Pompano Beach?
Pompano Beach, yeah.
So we're in downtown Pompano Beach. There's pavement everywhere and everything else.
That's what I say. Miami's the new Manhattan. That means we're the new Brooklyn.
But there's also water. There's water and fish right here behind us, right?
100%.
So conservation doesn't stop just because there's concrete there.
Right.
And we as humans have always existed on the landscape. Like there's a famous quote from the mid 19th century by George Perkins Marsh. It's something to the effect of, the great question is man of nature or over nature? And in that book, he talks about the idea of man being part of nature. It's one of the first conservation pieces that was ever written. And the idea is any successful society in history, mm-hmm. like going back to like the Visigoths, when they began destroying their natural resources to an unrepairable place, they failed.
Yeah.
So we have to learn how we can exist. So there's some group of people out there would say, come here and say, man, this is miserable. How do you live here in this concrete jungle? I don't know if it's miserable or not. It's not my cup of tea, but I don't know if it's miserable or not. I don't know if it's right or wrong. We have to learn how to exist with Fort Lauderdale and Pompano and also the Everglades.
You know, in a way, it's funny you bring that up because my wife's a lot of time is like, man, let's just move up to Sebastian, or let's just move up, somewhere where it's, less populated or to Vero or something like that. And I'm like, okay, I get that, but well, if everyone moves away, then who's going to save the here?
Yep.
And the now?
Yep.
And in some weird way, I'm not going to put that over doing the right thing for my family necessarily, but I do feel like, okay, there is a purpose for me being here still in this concrete jungle of Pompano Beach, and it really is. I mean, if you try to drive here at 5 o'clock, it's like the most horrible traffic you could ever experience.
But you're not going to undo Pompano Beach.
Not going to undo it.
So how can Pompano Beach exist as a member
mm-hmm.
of the conservation community?
Right.
And there are ways that can happen. I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but from better handling of runoff to better handling of trash and plastics to water quality to engaging people in understanding that, hey, we also have to grow up, not out, or we have to handle our waste better, or
right.
Like there's lots of ideas there that could engage a community like this to where it feels like a green type community, even though there's not a lot of green around here.
Yeah, and that's one of the things about this show, and that's one of the purposes of this show is putting out word and putting out message and having the right people on like yourself to discuss those topics. And that is one of the efforts that at least we try to make here, and also some things I discussed with you before about some of the new efforts that we're going to be putting forth in the coming year. And we're excited about that too. So I do want to talk to you about the Lako stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know right now it's a real hot button topic because it's brand new and a reminder of we're not there yet. When it's not being discharged, everyone kind of not forgets about it, but the general public goes, okay, we're good now, right? And then we're like, nope, here we go again. There's things like the reservoir and Lawson and Big Sugar and like all these other things that are involved with is Send It South really you just blindly say that? Is that really the right thing to do? I mean, because if you want to put the Everglades underwater, is it going to drown? I mean, explain to me your thoughts on the matter. I mean, I have no other way to say it than that because it's a matter.
So, and sure. I'm going to say the caveat again. Like there are people in our world, mm-hmm. and we've talked about some of them offline too, but there are people in our world that know this way better than I do. But I obviously pay close attention to Everglades restoration because mm-hmm. Everglades is pretty essential part of Florida.
Well, I think this extends beyond Everglades restoration too because it's affecting the coastlines on each side.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's a full-on state thing.
Oh, yeah.
At least from halfway down.
Well, and I spend as much time as anyone. This week I was on a cattle ranch working cattle across the street from the EAA. Mm-hmm. Like I spend a lot of time in what is the traditional Everglades south of Lake Okeechobee. I deal a lot with the ranchers. I deal a lot with the farmers. I have no shame in saying I've had conversations with U.S. Sugar and Big Sugar before because I see them as land managers and I see them as I run a duck hunting operation. Mm-hmm. I mentioned that earlier. So water is crucial to duck hunting operations. And managing good water is crucial to a lot of what goes on down there. And most of my operations are run on, I have a partner. His name's Matt Pierce. Best guy on the planet. Like not a better guy on the planet. So I have to shout him out. He's just incredible people. Most of our operations are run on conservation easements. Mm-hmm. So what that means is the development rights have been sold on those properties. And they are used, in this case, they're wetlands restoration easements, or WREs. They're used to help clean water. And so the rancher goes in and voluntarily puts fencing up or works with the Farm Bill or local soil and water board to put fencing up so that they can rotate cattle to use vegetation to clean water, move water slowly through so there's nutrient uptake, and then they can move cattle around again, graze that, and when they sell those cattle, they're actually exporting phosphorus. Like you're literally exporting it per head. Mm-hmm. All that said, water in that area of the world, I watched through the winter as we were watching the lake build up, and you knew we were in an El Nino year. We knew, like you can go buy your Witchcraft Farmer's Almanac that all of my rancher friends use and my wife also uses to plant tomatoes that we're never going to eat. You can go buy your Witchcraft Farmer's Almanac and tell like the weather pattern we're going into an El Nino year. So we knew it was going to be a wet year. We knew it. And we watched ranchers and farmers and everyone else in South Florida, you've got some control over your water movement and how you can let it flow around down there. But the district ultimately controls that. Mm-hmm. The Water Management District ultimately controls it. So like off one of our properties, it goes into a canal that goes into the Deer Fence Canal that goes into the STAs. That thing's flowing wide open because the district opened the gate because they were expecting a lot of water to come down. But we weren't sending any water out from the lake. And when you get into something like a conversation around Loers, around LOSOM, around the 47 different NGOs that are involved in it, and the state and federal agencies that are involved in it, no one is right. Yeah, it's like
gridlock.
No one's right because we all have a bias in it.
Right.
Right? Like if you look at Lake Okeechobee historically, that lake would cycle up and down substantially. Maybe over a 10-year span, you'd see a really low, I don't even know the historical data. I don't have it in front of me, but maybe once every 10 or 15 years, it'd get down to 8 feet. Mm-hmm. And once every 10 or 15 years, it'd get up to 20 feet. And back then before the dike, it would spread that out and you'd lose detritus and everything. That's why it's such good farmland. It's why it's such good agrarian land. When we put the dike around it, now the water goes up and down instead of out.
Right.
So when you raise that lake the way we have, I have ecological problems with the bands around LOSOM because the lake is just too high all the time. And if you don't have sunlight penetrating to the bottom, you're not getting plant growth.
Right.
You can go talk to the guys that fished the Roland Martins event a few weeks back. I saw an aerial photo where they're all fishing in like a 200-acre area on a 450,000-acre lake because that's the only place where there's fish because of the way we've managed the water levels.
So let me ask you this, right?
Sure.
And this is for the purpose of, we talked about transparency before the show, right? And education and bringing things to the table that we can discuss and people listening to this show can hear and have a better understanding as to what's going on, how it got here, and all that, right? So I want to ask questions that may be simple to some, but not obvious to others, that, like we talked about, the ancillary people. And I think those are really the people that need to get educated the most, are the I call them normal citizens that don't hunt and fish, because this is going to affect us all, whether you're a hunter or a fisherman.
Sure.
Right? It's not just about the captains on the water or the anglers on the water. It's really, at the end of the day, about everybody, right? So I think that this topic needs to get spread around to everyone who isn't necessarily, maybe even just weekend warriors that don't necessarily have the proper education. So I'm going to ask the obvious question: why was the dike put there in the first place?
To keep people from dying. Like that's why the dike was put there in the first place. Like when you had the hurricane of whatever year it was, 1928, it was the second deadliest hurricane in American history. And when it flooded out, it killed, I want to say 1,500 people. The lake flooded suddenly. Back then we didn't have, the radar systems and everything. Like now we watch hurricanes for 3 weeks. We're tired of them before they get here.
Yep.
Back then, like one day it looks rainy and then it's pouring rain and the lake just flooded out and killed a bunch of people. So Herbert Hoover, in his infinite wisdom, he's one of the great presidents of all time because he had the Depression and he built this dike. Starts building this dike around Lake Okeechobee, and the idea there is we'll never flood people out again. Now, over time, we've seen development happen along the lake. Nothing grand or great, but you've got the city of Clewiston, you got Belglade, you got Moorhaven. Like you've got little towns that have popped up there, and they've developed economies around those towns, as all towns do across the country when you have that happen. So, but yeah, the dike was put there to keep people from dying. That's the short story.
Right. So because this dike is there, now we have to raise and lower the levels and let the discharges out.
Well, but beyond that, like Lake Okeechobee, and we have a friend, Nyla Pipes, who's a friend of mine. She could explain this better than I can, but Lake Okeechobee is basically like the freshwater head for South Florida.
Right.
So that water level is dependent somewhat for water supply south of the lake. But you can't manage the lake without ecological ramifications within that confine. So last year, we all, myself included, said the lake is too high at this point. We're between two kind of management plans right now. So we're between LORS, Lake Okeechobee Regulation System, and LOSM, Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual. LOSM is supposed to be adopted
like 1930 something.
No, it's new.
I mean 1930, 2030.
No,
still in the 1900s.
LOSM is very new. LORS is a little bit older, but LOSM is very new. I think we've been using LORS since 2013 or something, but LOSM is very new. It's not in place yet.
Right.
That's one that a lot of folks have been advocating for, talking about, discussing.
Right. And that was the one I said 19, but I meant to say 20, like 2035 or 2037 or something was like the plan I read. I think
not for LOSM.
No?
So LOSM is being held up right now by actually a lawsuit that is, or a challenge internally by National Marine Fisheries Institute because they didn't get to review it. Even though they had years to review it, they didn't. So they've challenged it internally and held it up. But that challenge, I expect to be resolved soon. That being a subjective term,
right?
And
I'm thinking of the reservoir.
You're thinking of the EA reservoir.
I got my lines crossed.
So we were under LORS. Everyone advocated for LOSM, or a lot of folks advocated for LOSM. And in between, what are we going to do? Well, they created this thing called operational flexibility that kind of allowed them to deviate away from LORS and into some LOSM bands, because you manage the lake within bands. And I'm kind of oversimplifying it a little bit, but imagine you have these two outer edges and a rainbow of colors going across it. And depending on the lake level at any time, as well as the rainfall expected, as well as like there's these facts and figures that determine whether you flip a switch and let water in or out.
Right.
Naturally, if you live in a coastal area that's going to get discharges, you never want discharges. Like that's the idea, right?
Right. I
don't ever want a discharge to come here. Unfortunately, we've changed materially the state and the way that the water works. And so that water has to go somewhere, because we can't just let it eventually flood over the dike and kill people or worse. So there's operational flexibility allows for us to hold more water in the lake or less water in the lake. Or you could get into, I don't even have the numbers in front of me, so I don't remember them. I'm not a Lake O expert, but what you're talking about here is we knew that we were going into a wet time of year. We knew that there was a lot of water in the lake already, and we went into a dry season that was very rainy, and just kept adding water. Now we've got to do something with it. So I equate it to, like, I've got a credit card here.
Is it beneficial to let the water out sooner before it gets to a high level?
I would argue yes.
Yeah.
But I would also say this. We have to be careful about just making broad statements on it, because I think ecologically you have to be careful about the lake being at a stable level. That's bad. Ecologically, for Lake Okeechobee, which is one of the most important natural resources in the state of Florida, that lake has to cycle and fluctuate to allow vegetation to grow, to allow water to get clean, to allow fisheries to work. That lake is critically important for snail kites and eagles and limpkins, and like there's a ton of wildlife that occurs there that we're not hunting and fishing. Like this, it exists.
Right.
Like it's important to it. So you have to also manage it from an ecological level. And so there's this balance between human interests, human safety, human interest, ecological benefit. Like there's a number of factors there. I don't think we did a really good job with it this year. Hindsight's always 20/20 though.
Right.
I can play armchair quarterback. At the end of every season, I can give a review and tell you how they did. Mm-hmm. Based on, did we get discharges? What was the condition of the lake? And how does the lake look to me as a person on it? And I always give them an F because it never suits what I want. But you're talking about these really dynamic systems. Like we all have an ideal of, step away from Okeechobee for a second.
Okay.
Lake Kissimmee. It's up chain from Lake Okeechobee. It's up the Kissimmee River. I grew up hunting and fishing on Lake Kissimmee. It's a very important lake in my family. Hurricane Irma ran right up the middle of the state.
Yeah.
And when it did, it rolled up vegetation on Kissimmee. It stirred up the water on Kissimmee. It created a little bit of an ecological mess, even though it's a natural occurrence. Lake Kissimmee's still not right from that event. And we always look for boogeyman to blame. Okay. But the fact of the matter is that lake is dynamic. And if you took all the people out of the state of Florida, stuff like that still happens to Lake Kissimmee.
Right.
Like you're going to get a hurricane that rolls through here. You're going to get runoff from animals and everything. Like you're going to get all these impacts to it. And for 5, 7, 10 years, it may not be the same lake as it looked like 15 minutes ago. But you're also going to get drought conditions that are going to draw it down. And when you get a drawdown, you're going to get plant growth that explodes, and you get successional growth. So you're going to get your early plants and your later plants, And so
it's the long game.
Yeah. Like we tend to think of things, and I've seen this a lot on like the spraying side and the lake management side, where people are like, I want Lake Okeechobee or Lake Kissimmee or Lake Istapoga or Orange Lake to look like this every year. Nothing in nature intended for that body of water to look the same every year. So Okeechobee's become very magnified because it's such a giant body of water. I mean, it's massive.
Yeah, it's huge.
It's massive. And it is such an important water supply and freshwater head for not just agriculture, but also all of the humans that live south of the lake, that we manage it sometimes more as a reservoir and more in human interest than we do ecologically. And in this case, I'm kind of frustrated because we're getting discharges, but we're getting discharges because we managed it wrong ecologically in the first place.
Right.
And again, I'm not a scientist. And I've met with the Corps, I've met with the district. I know a lot of those folks, and I know they intend to do well as well. Like their heart is in, we want this right. But it's such a complex, deep issue that you could go cross-eyed studying it and trying to figure out. And I've often wondered like who was right, who was wrong in all these advocacy issues. Because you always hear that. You always hear people finger pointing and everything else. And I've been guilty as recently as last week. I was like, oh, it's fundraising season because we're doing discharges now. I don't take that comment back because I think it's true. Like we have to work on this stuff all the time, constantly. And I feel like we kind of missed the boat on this lake because this is not shocking to anyone that's paid attention to the situation. So we knew this was coming.
Yeah. And the weird thing for me is I love talking to you about this because it kind of polarizes the issue of, there's more than one point of view on this, and there's more than one way to party on this one. And, what's the answer? And if you have that answer as to the perfect solution to that, then, I mean, we might as well make you president of the United States because apparently you are just some diabolical genius, right? There is something that people are excited about, and there's some people that say, well, you shouldn't be excited about it, and that's the reservoir, right? Okay. So people tend to think that is the ultimate answer once this thing gets built. and it's not ready to get built for like another 10 years or so, or so they say.
Depends on who you ask what day it is.
Right. So exactly my point of saying, okay, who's got the answer, right? Is that really the solution? To have a reservoir, to have that kind of, I mean, now.
Man, put me on the spot, Dennis. Short answer, there is no magic solution to this problem. Right. There's no magic. So
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Today, no, I'm teasing you. Today, by the way, I've been wrong before in my life, so this may not be the second time that I'm wrong either.
My dad used to say, I've been wrong once before in my life, but actually turns out I was just mistaken. Okay. I was right. Dad used to always say.
So if you talk about the EAA reservoir, it is sometimes held up as a silver bullet, the crown jewel of Everglades restoration.
Right.
Man, I have a tough time swallowing that pill.
If I'm being honest, that's not the first time I've heard that. So
I have a tough time swallowing that pill. I'll say this: I don't think you've heard that from any hydrologists or engineers.
Right.
And I am neither a hydrologist or an engineer. I'm a conservation advocate. So my questions about the EAA reservoir are: the second it's full, what do we do?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're going to put this water in there, and then we're just going to have more water that we're moving around. Like surface water in Florida. Surface water in Florida. This is way out of my depth of expertise, but I grew up at an engineering house from somebody that worked for DEP. So surface water in Florida, like historically, you had water all over the state, and it would sit in areas. But then we came in and started manipulating the land. That water still has to exist somewhere. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, you can go through dry years and wet years, but that water still has to exist somewhere. So you got to put it somewhere. So I asked the question, like my first day in this world, why is there so much water in Lake Okeechobee? Like, where did it come from?
Right.
Like, why isn't it wherever it used to be? And it's because there's houses where it used to be.
Right.
Like there's pavement where it used to be. We're funneling it into systems.
You're already answering the question that I was just going to ask you. Like, how much is that of the impervious surfaces of the new neighborhoods that are creeping in on the Everglades and just all other lakes and streams and rivers that run through our state? I mean, that's got to be, to me, that's always been the biggest contributing factor to it.
I think it is the most under talked about thing in this conversation. It's fascinating to me how much we fixate. Again, not an Everglades restoration expert, but I want to say for comprehensive Everglades restoration, SERP, there were 64 or 68 projects to set up Everglades restoration. The EAA reservoir is one of them out of 68. So to paint it as a magic bullet, I'm not saying it's less important or more important, but like that's pretty substantial to do Everglades restoration.
Yeah.
Like I think sometimes we get target fixation, and sometimes I think that's intentional because it's easier for me to tell you to only fixate on this one thing. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it's easy for me to tell you to fixate on this one thing because it's digestible to you. But in reality, I think we sometimes target fixate on the wrong thing. We're going to fly into the side of a mountain because we're looking at the thing we're trying to shoot.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to step back and look at it a little bit at a bigger scale, at a bigger level. And I have been saying for eons, the way we handle human waste in this state, the way we handle sewage, the way we handle septic,
sewer's a big problem.
The way we handle runoff, man, there's
and the spraying.
Well, do you want to talk about spraying?
I know.
I'm happy to go there.
I know that
I'm comfortable going there.
Yeah, no,
all day.
I mean, it's a definitely a contributor to everything that you're talking about with the runoff and right.
I don't know if I buy that.
Okay,
explain. I don't know if I buy that.
Explain to me why.
And the hate mail, Travis at allfla.org is where you can send your hate mail for this. What I'm about to say. I am a science drives wildlife policy, science drives conservation policy guy. Okay. What's the best science we have at the moment? The best science we have at the moment would tell you that herbicides, you don't want to just fill up a lake with them or something else, but they're not really harmful. They break down fast. They don't last in soils. You'll hear these narratives out there and they don't. Like I've gone and challenged the people at the University of Florida. I've gone and challenged scientists on this. Like, no, look, you can go scoop muck out of Lake Istapoga where you say there's legacy herbicides, and we'll grow tomatoes in it today. We'll grow hydrilla in it today if you want us to. Like, and they've proven that theory is false. So we all kind of believe that if you spray, you're putting this poison into the lake,
right?
And then it lives in the lake. That's not true.
Is Roundup a contributing factor to this? I mean, is that a different category?
So Roundup
is that just a small
Roundup
amount?
is glyphosate.
Right.
Less than 1% of aquatic plant treatments in Florida are glyphosate.
Okay.
So I have some questions about glyphosate, just like a lot of people do. I'll also say this, though, like I have some questions about the anti-glyphosate side, which is glyphosate causes cancer. Well, we don't have any scientific link there. It's the only scientific link we have comes from the World Health Organization. And they also say that Coke causes cancer. You know what I mean? Like there's some questions there. We drink Coke like it's going out of style. So where is it on that list?
If you go to the state of California, pretty much everything causes cancer, right?
Exactly right. So I don't know that I would glyphosate. There's a lot of ag industry in the United States that is successful because of glyphosate, and we all eat it every day. Am I comfortable with that? No, I'm not. And I've got some questions about it, but I'm also not that smart about that thing. I do know that it's a non-issue in aquatic plant management. It's just not. Like, we just don't use it. We use it more at uplands than we do in aquatic systems.
Right.
I'll also say that I know that in aquatic systems, it's difficult for the state to even get stuff approved to use in aquatic systems because there's no market for it. Like, we talk about invasive plants in Florida all the time, and we got all these invasive plants, and they're really kind of noxious. The simple fact is that's not a problem in like a lot of the rest of the country. Like, it may be a problem in a lake in Tennessee or a couple of lakes in Tennessee, but Tennessee's not covered in water like we are. We are covered in it. So it's a problem in every lake here.
Yep.
So it's hard to even keep permitted or licensed herbicides on the market. They have to go through EPA approval. Then they have to go through FDAX approval. Then they have to go through FWC to be approved. Like, there's a lot of protective barriers that go in there. And let's talk about the plants for just a second. So the big four spray plants, I'm going to use their colloquial names, are hydrilla,
right,
hyacinth, water lettuce, and Cuban bulrush. Those are kind of the four that get the biggest bulk of this. One of those is a submerged plant, meaning it's under the water all the time. The other three are floating plants. If you don't treat a floating plant, it doubles like every 7 days in size.
Right.
Those floating plants could actually block out any light from penetrating the water, and they can kill massive swaths of submerged vegetation. Your eelgrass, your pondweed, your naiads, like your native vegetations that we want here. Whereas if you go and you treat those areas, and then this is a problem a lot of folks have trouble with, there's an idea of something called maintenance mode, where let's say you've got 25 acres of hyacinth on a lake. If you go treat that 25 acres, if you come back every week and just find the dots of it, the rosettes of it that are existing, maybe they're 3 feet in diameter, maybe they're a foot in diameter, and just start spot treating those, you're putting way less herbicide into the water, and you're keeping that invasive out. And so, honestly, I wish an airboat would go every day and spot treat all of those. I wish we were on the water to spray more because you'd use way less herbicide doing it that way.
Right.
Then if we wait for it to get to some massive amount.
Kind of like letting out discharges sooner?
It's almost the exact same logic there.
So
almost the exact same logic there.
One of the reasons that I was really excited to bring you in here on the show is that, Connected Water, we don't toe like a party line or company line on any of these topics. I'll say again how I started this show out. At the end of the day, I think we all want the same thing, right? We all want healthy waterways. We want clean flowing waterways. We want healthy land. We want healthy people, and we don't want that to affect our balance with. You said it perfectly. Are we over nature or are we of nature? And I think that's ultimately where we need to find ourselves and how we fit into the role of Florida and what we want to achieve and what we want to accomplish. We talked a little bit about, when you and I spoke on the phone the other day, about it's a marathon, not a sprint, but it's not a marathon where we're going to cross a finish line.
Yeah.
It's continual work. It's going to be ongoing work. We can definitely improve our situation. We can definitely get better about how we manage this and how we thrive. Obviously, the lake is a problem, right? And we just exhausted all the different reasons why and everything like that. And that's why I think most of the focus is there. But there's other things going on around the state right now, too, other than that are also an issue. So one of the reasons, or the biggest reason why I was excited to bring you on the show, is because you're going to kind of lay it out for people in your mind, or whatever, I'll just say it the way it is, right? And I want to bring in all points of view, because looking for solutions or maybe educating people on what better angles there are to solve some of the problems that we face, or what we're all about, right? I don't care if it's Republican or Democrat, or if it's following this popular organization, or if it's not. At the end of the day, we all want the same thing, and how do we get there? So discuss with me some of the things in your mind that are imperative that are going on in the rest of the state.
Before I discuss what's going on in the rest of the state, you triggered something in my mind as you said that.
Yeah.
I think something that's important is the way we talk about issues.
Okay.
And our vocabulary that we use. I try to be a good communicator. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I see is a lot of times we'll say toxic Lake Okeechobee.
Right. Lake
Okeechobee is not toxic. That water, I'll go swim in that water. I'll go fish in that water. I've waded in that water. Like, that lake isn't toxic. But when that kind of vernacular is used, and you didn't use it, that's what triggered in my head as you were talking. When that kind of vernacular is used, it puts people on the defensive, because it's almost like there's two factions. It's a coastal faction, the inland faction, and it puts people on the defensive of.
That's politics 101, though.
That's
right?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
You create a divide, a division there. That lake's not toxic, but at the same time, like we've just got to be better about communicating well and using facts that do not trigger emotions around some of the communications that we do. So
and that's it's an interesting thing that you talk about that, because it's really true. Because if you look at a guy like myself, what am I compared to guys like you that are in it every day? You know what I mean? I take a broader scope. I like to find out about the entirety of the state and all different kinds of topics. I want to talk about snook fishing, and I want to talk about everything else on this show, right? I mean, I'm trying to educate myself literally in real time in front of anyone who's willing to watch me try to educate myself, because I think that's beneficial for anyone else who wants to watch this show and educate themselves. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I was excited to bring you, because, like, educate me. I want to find out what you know. you know it's true, though. And I want to find out what the guy that disagrees with you knows. And I want to really just educate myself. And I think every Floridian should do this. Maybe not have a podcast or a show, but at least have the conversation. At least talk to people about it and find out what the truth is, rather than just kind of put your focus on one group and say, whatever they say, we'll just go along with that. Bullshit. I want to find out the truth.
Be curious, not judgmental.
Right.
That's what Ted Lasso says.
Right. Love that show.
I do too.
Yeah.
So you asked about what's going on around the state. I'll tell you. I'll tell you a small thing that I'm working on and a big thing that I'm working on that are kind of exciting me. One of the things that we've kind of been talking about recently is snail kites. Mm-hmm. And we had a development on one of our properties this year where a snail kite is have you guys seen them? You know what a snail kite is?
I don't know what a snail kite is.
So it's a bird. They're native.
I know what a kite is, but I mean.
So there's swallowww kites. That's our logo.
Yeah.
That's a swallowtail kite. And then
that I know.
A snail kite it's called the Everglades snail kite.
Okay.
They're obviously indigenous to Florida. There's about 3,000 of them left in North America. They're on the endangered species list. And we had this moment this year where we manage water down south of the lake for waterfowl hunting.
Yep.
And my partner, my rancher buddy, Matt, called me one day and he said, "Hey, there's a lot of snail kites out here." And I said, "Okay, we always see a few around, like 20. Is that a lot?" And he's like, "No, man, there's a lot." I'm like, "Okay, how many you think?" He's like, "Hundreds." I was like, "Come on, bud." So he sends me a picture and there's like 60 or 80 in a tree. I'm like, "Oh, that's a lot." So I go down the next day and there's hundreds. I mean, they're just freaking everywhere. And so I'm like,
start reading through Revelation and stuff.
Yeah, like what is going on here? And so, if there's 3,000 in the state, we've got 300 to 500 of them on this property. Like we got more than 10% of all of them left in the United States.
Yeah.
So I call FWC, I call U.S. Fish and Wildlife, I call University of Florida. I'm like, "Hey, there's a lot of snail kites here. Just letting you guys know." They're like, "Oh, we need to come see that." So are they nesting? I'm like, I wouldn't know a snail kite nest if you threw it at me and it hit me in the face. So they come out and we drive through the gate onto this property and they're like, oh, that's a snail kite nest and that's a snail kite nest and that's a snail kite nest. So this is a nesting colony now. And they were really nervous about, they came in, they were like, are you guys going to let us come on here and like research these? Because if we start researching them, it may impact your hunting, it may impact your cattle stuff, everything else.
It's like when the scientists from ET invade. I mean,
exactly.
They get all set up.
They take all the control, and we're like, look, we want to work with you. We want to be good stewards of this place. Like I talk about place a lot. Mm-hmm. We want to be good stewards of this place, and so they're like, absolutely, we'll work with you. Like I was like, if you tell me we can't hunt here anymore, that's a problem. But if you say, hey, could you not hunt within 100 feet of the nest or something, we'll work around it. Like we want you to be successful. We want these birds to be successful. So it was a really cool story. We ended up banding with the University of Florida, and we've got a little film coming out probably in the next week or two.
Really?
Yeah, it's a really short film, like a vignette. It's about 3 minutes long, and it celebrates the idea.
What's the name of it?
We don't have a name for it.
You don't have it? Can you name it?
We call it our snail kite video.
Yeah, nice.
But it kind of celebrates this idea of collaboration within. I talked about the wildlife corridor, and I've talked about cattle ranchers and taking care of land to take care of water, and how all of this stuff kind of works together. And the idea of, because of ranching, because of a conservation easement, because of hunting, this endangered species, this critically endangered species in the United States is thriving. And so we saw 100 or so of those kites fly away safely at the end of the year to go to Lake Okeechobee, to go to other places to forage for snails. And our hope is we can begin to cycle that and present a nesting program that's occurring on this waterfowl hunting operation on a cattle ranch.
So it's a good
in the wildlife court. It's an incredible thing. Like I just think it's a story that's worth sharing.
Yeah,
because it gives me hope. Because what you're seeing
I
is
thought you were going to say something to the effect that it was like an invasive species and it's a problem. It's kind of like the parrot thing.
Oh, this is
against
incredible.
The blackbird, like the when those green parrots got. I don't know if you remember that. Like
no.
So down here in South Florida, like I would have to say in the late '90s, there was an influx of these green parrots that got out into the wild, and and then there were other ones too that happened. The parrots got out from one of the Metro Zoo when Hurricane Andrew came in, and all these exotic species coming out, and it was really damaging to like the local blackbird population. Yeah, and they were eating up all their food.
They outcompeted them.
and they outcompeted them exactly because parrots are a more aggressive bird.
No,
especially those green ones. They're faster, they're stronger, and
this is a good story, happy story.
Yeah,
celebration of like what's right in conservation. What's going on in conservation. But then I also have a policy thing that's pretty cool that I've been working on. And I've been working, we could go down the list of policy stuff that we've got cooking right now.
Right.
And it would probably bore you to tears to some degree, but there's a lot of stuff where we're working on opening access to new areas for people. Mm-hmm. Because again, I don't know if I said this out loud, but there's a famous quote, you can serve the things you love the things you're taught the things you understand. No. Serve the things you love the things you understand the things you're taught. Mm-hmm. I often think we don't connect people. A kid could grow up down the street here in a concrete jungle, not know that there's snook in that canal.
Yeah.
Right? Like unless we teach them that this is important for other reasons, that's on us.
Yeah.
That's on not just us, but like it's on all of us, the collective us, all of Florida. It's on us to do that, to ensure that happens. So we've been working really hard to try to get some new areas open to access. We've been working really hard to bring some more people to the table in conversations. We're one of the more inclusive folks you'll find out there, in that if somebody wants to talk to us, we'll meet with them, talk to them, like have the conversation. But the policy thing that's most buzzing around my head right now is the right to fish and hunt.
Right.
And this is a big deal.
So this is going to be on the ballot this November.
It's November 5th. You would be able to vote for the right to fish and hunt.
And this is really, really, really important, because this is something that, when it first came out, I didn't believe it. Like, I didn't believe that this is actually something that we needed to fight for. But apparently it is.
It's not just something we need to fight for. It's something everybody should care about, even if you're not a hunter or an angler, which I can't imagine nobody listening to this podcast isn't an angler, but even if you're not a hunter or an angler, you want clean water, right? The only way you're going to have clean water is to make sure that the government has to ensure you have clean water, because unfettered, they would develop every inch of everything as long as they can make a profit off of it, like unchecked. Codifying this thing as a constitutional right and giving us the right to hunt and fish ensures that wild places and wild things will always exist. That's not Travis's math. That's an imperative, like that's built into the North American conservation model. If you attach a value to being able to harvest something, people will make sure that thing exists.
Yeah.
When you went through like stock downages on turkeys in the early 1900s or waterfowl, you never closed it outright. You reduced the season and you reduced the amount they could take. You never closed it outright, because when you close it outright, you remove the impetus for people to care about it the same way. The opportunity to have the potential to harvest ensures that resource exists. You close it off, no reason for it to. Like you can get really sideways on it. So you want clean water. I can connect the right to fish to clean water very quickly. State of North Carolina has this constitutional right. They passed it 3 years ago. And in North Carolina, you could still gill net. You still get it. Florida, gill netting is illegal, but in North Carolina, you can still gill net. So the citizens of North Carolina passed this on their ballot, and they then turned around and sued the state and said, you're allowing these gill netters to take all the fish, and there's no fish for us to catch. And we think there has to be fish for us to catch because you gave us the right to fish. Judge, so there's precedent, there's case law precedent now, said, you are correct. That right can't exist in the abstract. So you have to make sure there are fish available for, you can't just say you have the right to hunt and fish and then kill all the deer and remove all the fish.
Right.
The right has to be usable, exercisable. So similarly, in Florida, we face water quality issues all the time. This right could be leveraged in a water quality case, because if we saw it impact a fishery, be it in freshwater or in saltwater, it could be leveraged to say, this right does not exist in the abstract. The state of Florida has to act to ensure that we have viable populations of fish to catch.
Man, I love that.
It's incredible, right? Like that's something that even if you didn't want to fish or hunt, this thing becomes critically important to you as a water quality issue. Similarly, on the land side, if you want wild places with gopher tortoises and panthers and bears and everything else, you better make sure there's places where people can hunt deer. You better make sure there's places people can hunt turkey, because all of that stuff exists in the same place. And you go to a WMA or whatever. We talked a little bit about the wildlife corridor. 19% of the Florida wildlife corridor was acquired with sportsman's dollars. So the largest contributor to the wildlife corridor to this point in time have been sportsman dollars. Like if you took a single entity. So even if you didn't want to hunt, even if you didn't want to fish, this should matter greatly to you, because it's going to keep wild stuff wild, and it's going to keep water clean, and it's going to give us a reason to be able to fight for that stuff moving forward. It is critically important that people understand that.
Wow, that's a really important thing.
It's hugely important. This, I say, and I hope it doesn't sound hyperbolic, because I don't say this kind of stuff very often. This is probably the most important thing we can vote on as conservationists in Florida.
Yeah.
I don't foresee another piece of legislation like that we can vote on in the next 15, 20 years. I don't know what it would possibly be. This is it.
I mean, if it goes the opposite way, I'm kind of scared.
Yeah. If it goes the opposite way, that's terrifying. You can't lose this.
I mean, and there's got to be an argument for the economic driver as well, right?
There is an argument for the economic driver, but
I mean, in our favor.
Oh, yeah, because fishing is worth $14 billion.
That's what I mean.
Hunting's worth another couple billion in the state. I mean, they're not insignificant numbers.
Yeah.
At the same time, I can make the argument that development's worth a whole lot more than that. Like it's not an either or.
But development started the problem.
It's exactly right. But I'm saying if you don't have the impetus to fish.
Right.
So let's talk Death by a Thousand Cuts. Told you I'm a Taylor Swift fan.
It's funny.
That's a great Taylor Swift song.
When Derek and Corey were on like 2-3 episodes ago, that's Derek calls it all Death by a Thousand Cuts.
Yes, Death by a Thousand Cuts. So if you don't pass this, is fishing in trouble? No, it's a $14 billion industry. What are we going to do with fishing? Well, when you saw red tide hit Southwest Florida 3 years ago, 5 years ago, whenever, what happened economically to the fishermen? they were suddenly out of business. So suddenly the hotels people stopped coming to. If you see degradation in water quality, if you see impacts to stuff like that, now you've removed the impetus to fish. Yeah. Right? Like, we still love fishing and we'll go fish other places, but you've changed the...
I'll fish in the puddle of 2 inches of water right in the parking lot right now.
But you've changed the way that economically that system... So if someone could come in during that time and change the economic values of that locality,
yeah,
you don't need to put fishing back. So you could take it away slowly over time if you're not ensuring that we have clean water, have the resource available.
Isn't that how things just generally get taken away from you, though?
It's 100%. So people came to me.
We don't do it in a totalitarian way.
No,
we don't do it. There's too much of a microscope on you. We do it slowly and generationally until it's gone.
If you go to
that's freedom, baby.
There's a story out there. You can go Google like threats to hunting and fishing in Oregon or Colorado or California, and you see it in those states. Very, very boldly, you see it. And people say, well, we don't see those same threats in Florida. And I'm like, we don't see those same threats in Florida, but what we see are these little cuts in Florida that are, because hunting and fishing aren't a priority, we see these little cuts that occur here. And you don't wait till it becomes a problem to save it. Right? Like, if you could take this action now, it's done.
Right.
Because undoing a constitutional amendment...
putting up the traffic light after the accident.
Yeah, like, let's not wait till it is... Do we have anti-hunting groups in Florida? Absolutely we do. Do we have anti-fishing groups in Florida? Absolutely we do. But there was a few years back where someone was angling in Tampa or Tarpon Springs over there, and some people dressed up as animal activists went and took their fish and threw it back in the lake. Like, they had a fish that they had caught and laid it in a cooler or something, and these guys came up and took it.
Dead fish.
Yeah, there's people out there that are just after what we do and care about. We don't want to wait till that threat becomes maximized. But we also have some really good reasons to proactively go out and protect it anyway that are conservation-based. So I tend to focus more on the conservation-based than I do on the... Well, in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, we're going to have people...
I'm the same way. Like, I listen, to me, it's white noise, those groups. It really is. I don't pay mind to them. I don't pay attention to them. I mean, without naming names of what the groups are, I mean, it's just not... I focus more on what we can do to help, rather than fighting some sort of battle that is going to be pointless and useless.
I'll say to your listeners, because I'm going to guess they're way more angler heavy, there's a narrative out there going that says that if we establish this constitutional right, it would reinstate the net ban. It would undo the net ban. And I will tell you that's unequivocally false. Like, I did my high school senior paper on the net ban. I love the net ban.
Let me ask you a question. Shoot. I don't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, you're fine.
Because I'm going to forget this if I don't ask it now, right? Would any of that affect sharking and sharks?
No.
Everything would stay as is.
No, because
would any of that be able to change?
No, because what we want is a constitutionally created body, FWC, to be able to set all regulations around take of game, fish and game. We never want a ballot box biology decision. If you look at wolf reintroduction in Colorado, there's people on both sides of that conversation. Some are the greatest thing ever. Some are like it's the worst thing ever. But I will tell you exactly how wolf reintroduction happened is the people in Boulder, Colorado Springs, and Denver voted to reintroduce wolves, and the other 52 counties ended up with the wolves. You had people out there that didn't want them, rangers out there that didn't want them, and you had Colorado Parks and Recreation, or whatever their wildlife agency is, saying this is not the right way to go about it.
Right.
Was it right to reintroduce wolves or not? I don't know. But I know that biology and science didn't drive it. Popular opinion did. I want to avoid that becoming a thing in the future, and this is the way to avoid that becoming a thing in the future.
It's one of my favorite stories to tell is the cobra effect, right? So in India, there was a problem with cobras. And so the Indian government was like, okay, listen, we are going to pay people arbitrarily $100 per cobra, right? You got to go out and get all these cobras. We'll collect them. We'll burn them, right? So all these guys were like, oh, man, we can get all these cobras. And so they're finding cobras all over the place. Pretty soon they cleaned up their problem, and they developed an unintended circumstance. All these guys that quit their jobs to become cobra hunters are now out of a job. So what did they do? They started planting cobras in people's houses. Like, oh, I'm a cobra hunter. I'll come get my $100, and it would turn into a scam. Right, and before you know it, they started multiplying, and you have more cobras than they ever had in the first place.
Yep. See, so wildlife policy should always be driven by science. Yeah. Conservation should always be driven by science. This is why the right to fish and hunt is so critically important.
Yeah.
Because if we don't pass it, I believe what we're looking at is a future with ballot box biology.
Right.
And the last thing, I'm telling you straight up, the last thing you want is questions asked about why you're catching and releasing redfish. Because if you're just going to catch and release them, isn't that crueler than catching them and keeping them? Because 8% of them die anyways. There's a mortality there. Why don't we just shut that down? Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not saying that's going to happen tomorrow, but I am saying it's not conspiracy theory-ish to follow that line of thinking when you look at what's happened in some of those other states.
Yeah.
Like, let's go ahead and protect it now. Let's go ahead and lock it down now. Let's get it done. It's got to pass with 60% of the vote. Tell your friends and family about it. And I will tell you, too, at allfla.org, at our website.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, is there a place people can go to?
There's a backslash and then R2FH. R, the number 2, FH, right? Okay. To fish and hunt. We've got all the FAQs out there. I talk about the net ban. I talk about how that doesn't get impacted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Please, I can't tell you how to vote. I work for a nonprofit, but I think you can infer like how critically important this is to us going forward as a state and from a conservation standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we're going to have to do a better job here of putting the word out about that and just making it polarizing of how important it actually is, because you bring up a lot of valid points here, and a lot of very important points, and and I'll just say to people listening and watching the show, I mean, if you care about any of this, of what you do or what your passion is, or what we're trying to achieve from a healthy state, I mean, then you gotta look into this.
Yeah, and get your friends and family to show up and vote for it too. Like it's critically important. It's critically important. I work on, like I said, stuff that has nothing to do with hunting and fishing a lot. I worked on an environmental lands program last year in a county. I work on a lot of stuff that is about saving wild Florida and the things that we love and the way that we're able to interact with them.
Yeah.
This is as much as important to that as any of the land conservation stuff or anything else you can talk about. It is hugely important.
All right, we'll definitely get the word out on that. It's funny you talked about the past civilizations that deplete their resources and none of them survive. And to me, it's if you do it to yourself, you just basically it's like a World War II scorched earth policy. When you're about to get attacked by an incoming army and you burn your own farmlands just so you'll be able to survive that final war, and that's really not a sustainable scenario.
No.
And it's scary. And I just want to really add before we kind of close out here that first of all, I want to thank you for coming on the show greatly. I mean, you dropped a lot of knowledge today, and we appreciate it. And some of it I was not expecting, which is good, because I love hearing things I wasn't expecting to hear. And some of the things that we just wanted to kind of get the word out, like the right to hunt and fish and stuff like that. And I just really wanted to thank you for coming on and sharing your knowledge. And we covered a lot of topics today. We went over a lot of things. And I want to actually thank you for talking about all that Lako stuff. I know you said it wasn't your specialty and everything, but I think that you are so hyper-focused on everything that you do for our state that you still know more about that situation than 99.9% of the people do. So thank you for that.
No, I appreciate you guys having me on there. And like I said, don't take it as gospel. Do your own research and dig into it and ask questions and be curious.
Yeah, and I think that's really ultimately the point, right? Listen, get involved, get educated.
Show up.
There you go.
Real quick anecdote. I used to go to spray meetings and I would yell. I wouldn't yell, but I would talk angrily at the staff about what they were doing to my lake. And this is like 2004, 2005, 2006. And over time, I would get approached by different staff members and they'd talk to me and they would tell me, and I would start to learn. And it's interesting, like once you start to have conversations, your perspective shifts, not because you're being brainwashed or indoctrinated or anything else, but because you're listening instead of just talking to.
Yeah.
And we have to do a lot better job of listening in these conversations versus just yelling, trying to get some attention. And I think we need to do better at that. Like everybody in all of these conversations needs to do a better job of that.
Yeah, I agree. Travis, thank you so much for coming on this show.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate you.
And I appreciate you coming in from out of town and all that. So, man, I feel like we still got more work to talk about here, but maybe we could do another episode.
Come back.
That'd be great. I'd love that.
Maybe I'll come back.
I really would love that. Definitely. All right. Well, we're going to end this like we always do, right? Your ego. It's not your amigo. Always do your best, and at the end of the day, just let God do the rest. And do not ever forget that no matter where we are, no matter what we're doing, we're all connected by water. Thanks, Travis.
Thank you.